This is Speak Up. I am Sandra Schulte. Welcome back to our show. Today, I am very happy to have Peter Huessy back with us again. His specialty is defense strategy for the United States of America. He has been doing this for 50 years. Currently, Peter is president and senior director of strategic studies at Geostrategic Analysis since 1981. From 2021 through 2023, Peter was also doing defense studies with the Hudson Institute as a senior fellow. Before that, he was both a consultant and director of strategic deterrence studies at the Air Force Association Mitchell Institute. He is now a senior fellow at the National Institute for Deterrence Studies. As a side venture, since 2011, Mr. Huessy has created, funded, and hosted nuclear triad symposiums twice annually in cooperation with Global Strike Command and LSUS, CIC, LTRI in Louisiana, the Minot Task Force 21, the Crane, and the Indiana Surface Warfare Base. This is simply a sample of Mr. Huessy's resume. Welcome to our show, Mr. Huessy.
Thank you, Sandra. It's a pleasure to be here.
I would appreciate your giving us an idea of where we are in reference to deterrence and what happens when you lose the ability to deter, like we did in the Ukraine and especially in Iran.
Very good question. The end of the Cold War, or Cold War number one, as I call it, the United States had established itself as the premier power in the world. And we went on a holiday and didn't take nuclear or conventional conflict very seriously. We had the World Trade Center bombing of 93, Khobar Towers in Saudi Arabia, the embassies bombed, and then USS Cole. And of course, 9/11. And during that period of time, the bad guys did not go to sleep. Boris Yeltsin, who most people think is the good Russian versus Putin, the bad Russian, issued a decree in 1999, in April, saying to his military, develop battlefield nuclear weapons that are very accurate and very small that I can use on the battlefield to defeat conventional armies or militaries. Why is this important? After Desert Storm, when we kicked Saddam out of Kuwait, and after we took down the Taliban, look, we had guys on horseback with laptops keying in coordinates that the Northern Alliance would give us, and B-52s at 40,000 feet were dropping joint-directed air munitions on the Taliban, what the Northern Alliance called rods from God. And we wiped them out. And by December of 2001, it was gone. They're done.
And we went back to sleep?
Well, what happened is, once having taken down the Taliban and driving Al-Qaeda, some went to Iran, some went into the Pakistani foothills, we kind of said, okay, we're going home. Well, we did. We stayed almost 20 years. And then when we took down Saddam in record time in 2002, it was, okay, then what? We didn't find the stockpiles of chemicals, weapons, or much of our programs, but we knew, according to the UN, Caius and Butler, the two ambassadors, they wrote a book about this in 2000, saying Saddam will go get nuclear weapons soon. So be on your lookout. And yet we didn't have a plan. So we had this enormous conventional capability, which deterred a lot of folks from doing bad things, except for the terrorists. They weren't deterred. But Yeltsin put on the table, developed nuclear weapons for battlefield. Putin took them seriously. So all during the early 2000s, while we were involved in Iraq and Afghanistan, Putin built, and we could calculate, he'd give a speech. We're going to have 50% done by 2014. We're going to have 100% done by 2021, 22. And he's basically kept to that schedule. And if you go and look at the military, U.S. military testimony before Congress, they say our conventional war plans, our war games, we basically win. We're better than the other guys. But they also said something else. If the bad guys introduce nuclear weapons,
Heaven help us.
none of it works. None of it works. And then the question is, you can't then just build a better conventional force because the bad guys, Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, whatever, however you want to group them, once they introduce nuclear weapons, none of it matters. So then the question is, well, don't we have nuclear weapons at the theater level? I mean, short range, small battlefield. We have a couple hundred gravity bombs that are dropped from fighter planes that are based in Europe. Here's the issue. A fighter plane has to leave a base, fly to the other guy's place, and drop a bomb right over the target. Well, who's going to be there? Air defenses, missile defenses, and other planes trying to keep you out. And it takes time. Plus, they know where the base is. They can target it. So the Posture Commission recently came out in October. It was mandated by Congress, had an equal number of Republicans and Democrats. They were unanimous in their conclusion of we need this kind of capability, meaning nuclear weapons that are short, that are based where you don't have to worry at sea, because I don't have to get permission to do that, and quickly to target. Well, that's a cruise missile, nuclear armed. The thing is, Trump proposed it and supports it, as does Congress. But the Biden administration has said no. They've said, even though China and Russia combined will have far more nuclear weapons than we do, their comment has been, well, we don't need to build more nuclear weapons, any additional nuclear weapons, just better deterrence. And they have left that kind of undefined. But my point is, better conventional deterrence we need anyway for non-nuclear armed people. But for the nuclear armed guys, we need something at the low level, because John Kennedy said this as a candidate way, way back in 1960. In those times, the Eisenhower administration had something called massive retaliation, going after leadership in Russia and the Soviet Union, military targets, and it was everything. And Kennedy said, it's not much of a strategy if your choices are between everything or nothing. So he said, I need flexible response. And then we'd already developed a lot of battlefield nuclear weapons. I mean, crazy things like nuclear bazookas and grenades and stuff, and basically was throw the darn thing over the bridge and run. It was, but, so Kennedy understood this dilemma of if you threaten Armageddon, well, at what point are you willing to go in? Because they take over, pick a place. And that was the dilemma we were in, and that's why under Kennedy gradually, and then under Nixon, and particularly under Reagan, we developed what is called a capability to go after the other guy's leadership, security forces that keep them in power, and their military. Meaning, at the end of the day, you won't have a military with which to rule. So why'd you go to war in the first place? We're not in the business of city busting. Cities don't attack us. Mm-hmm. And the people in those cities are totally without power to direct Putin or Xi Jinping or anybody like a totalitarian power. They don't have a say in, and they're not guilty anyway. And even if they are guilty, I'm not in the business of killing millions and millions of people. So where we are today is we have a very formidable military, but it's smaller. The Air Force, for example, is the smallest in our history and oldest. By comparison, when Reagan came into presidency, he said we are inheriting in a hollow army. He didn't mean just army, Army, Navy, Air Force. There were planes that couldn't fly. There were ships that couldn't steam. There were soldiers living in barracks you wouldn't put a dog in. Training was terrible. Morale was bad. Desertions were high. Drug use was high. And when he came in, I was one person that he sent around with a bunch of us to all military bases around the country. We flew on an Air Force cargo plane, basically, and went and visited dozens and dozens of bases. And the average age of an Air Force airplane at that day, when Reagan came into office, 12 years. It's now 28. Woo. So we're now getting rid of these old systems because they're so expensive, because we haven't built new ones.
And they're not updated either.
So the legacy systems are getting more and more expensive, and so we have to get rid of them to save money to put in research and development. But this new stuff is going to come aboard in the late part of this decade. The question is, in the meantime, will the bad guys wait around until we get better? Which is the dilemma we're facing is, as a former Secretary of Defense said, you come to war with the military you inherit. You can't, one thing about losing time and going to sleep as we did at the end of the Cold War, what General Herensack called a holiday from history, as we pretended Fukuyama said, it's the end of history. Everybody's going to be a liberal democracy, and we don't have to worry about the threats anymore. It's baloney. And so we did go to sleep. The last nuclear platform, bomber, airplane, submarine, missile that we built was 1997,
And we
the
don't have
last
them-
B-2 bomber.
And we don't have the manufacturing facilities.
We have an industrial base that could not do what we did in World War II. In World War II, which is amazing, and Victor Hansen points this out, we produced more weapons than the Axis and all our allies combined.
We had factories.
We absolutely did. So we're now in a dilemma of how do we catch up in the nuclear business in the low-level limited strike. The Posture Commission put it this way. Russia and China are in the business of using nuclear weapons to coerce America to stand down, not to fight. That's vastly different than having nuclear weapons to deter an attack in the first place. They see nuclear weapons as facilitating their ability to attack, i.e. Ukraine, i.e.
Any place.
Taiwan. That's a vast change, is that nuclear weapons are seen as a tool to support aggression as opposed to the way we think, the American people think of deterrence. We're preventing the bad guy from doing bad things, but we're not in the business of we're going to do, take over a country and then tell the Russians, don't go any further because we have nukes and we're going to blast you. That's Russia's plan. And that's what Putin has said dozens and dozens of times in Ukraine. We'll use nuclear weapons if you send American planes or soldiers or whatever. So it's kind of, we didn't deter him from coming into Ukraine in the first place. We didn't in 2014. We sent blankets to Ukraine, nothing else. In 2014, we didn't do anything about Moldova and Georgia when he went in 2008. And the question is, understood, what should we have done? In 1994, we told Ukraine, give up your nuclear weapons, and we'll take care of your security. And Britain signed the document, Russia signed the document, United States. But then we kind of went to sleep and didn't prepare Ukraine. We did do some training. So when you come down to it, the criticism of Ukraine aid is based on what's your plan to win? And I don't see a plan to win. I understand the objective. Kick Russia out of Donbass, kick them out of Crimea. All I did. The Ukraine have kicked them out of Sevastopol, which I think is extraordinary. The first time in 200 years the Russian Navy is not in Sevastopol. And that's because the Ukraine, they're very clever, very creative, but they're stuck in the ground war. It's kind of a stalemate, and all the stalemate does is going to destroy more and more of the Ukraine country, which I think is a horrible tragedy. But will Ukraine sign a ceasefire where Russia gets to keep some stuff? Because that's what Putin, I believe, has asked for, a ceasefire, which would give him, the wolf took down a couple of the cows, and now he wants to have a ceasefire, as opposed to we're going to go out and kill the wolf.
Because he wants to be able to prepare himself for the next stage.
Well, that in the question then is, he says, no, I'm not going to go into Latvia or a NATO country, but he does threaten them. It's unclear when he says, I'm going to use nuclear weapons, is he going to hit New York? No. But is he going to hit Kiev? I don't know. Is he going to hit the Czech Republic, or is he going to hit Latvia or Sweden? The interview with Carlson, what is interesting is you now know the extent to which this man is deluded. And deluded people with thousands of nuclear weapons are dangerous. They're dangerous enough, okay? They can be totally wrong about things. Hitler was totally wrong.
It doesn't matter.
But he didn't have a 1,000-year Reich. He had a 12-year Reich. And how many tens of millions of people did he end up killing, not only in the Holocaust, but in war, against the West, and then finally against the USSR. So we're in a dilemma right now. We can't get back the time we wasted and we were asleep. You never can. So you're the bad guys get to vote. They get to decide when they're going to do something, whether it's against Taiwan or against Ukraine. So we're catching up, okay? And the seriousness is, deterrence works And I'd much rather deter someone than have to fight a war and try to win it when each side's got nukes hanging around and you wonder how far can you go. That's the dilemma we're facing.
In what ways are our nuclear deterrence capabilities challenged?
Well, as I mentioned, we need a short-range, easily used weapon to deter. And that's a Navy cruise missile. We had Navy cruise missiles, Tomahawks. We put them on storage under President Bush 43. Unfortunately, the next administration, Mr. Obama, got rid of them. And it's going to be, I've heard different numbers, either 6, 7, 8, 9, in that neighborhood number of years you need to rebuild them. Because I can put them at sea on a surface ship or submarine, and no one will know where they are. And I'm not going to have demonstrations about, oh, you can't put them on this base in Britain or Germany or Turkey or wherever, like we did the SS or INF missiles, the Persians and Glickums. Or you guys remember the demonstrations in Europe were all funded, many of them funded by the Russians at the time. But we succeeded because we had Thatcher and Kohl and Reagan, which was, Providence was shining down on us. But we also had the Pope, who in his undramatic way supported the deployment of these weapons and said that deterrence is necessary. Though he said, I don't particularly like nukes. The carnage that would come from a war is terrible. But Pope John, God love him, the four of those people were extraordinary leaders. And that's, I'm not going to say we don't have good leadership today, but tragically we don't. Part of it is we can't agree on what we're moving in the right direction on strategic nuclear stuff. On theater nuclear stuff, no, not so much. We are going forward on conventional, but you have a budget that is not even passed. We're spending at last year's level, which means you can't start a new program. And we're out about $40 billion, about $38 billion less than what was agreed to in the budget. So Congress, and it's not just Congress, it's the administration, both parties, haven't passed a budget. And now, if you go back to 1980, when Reagan came in, 81, the number of years in which we've had a defense budget passed on time is 4.
Wow. 4
years out of 40 plus. Okay? Now, usually the budget gets passed 6 months into the fiscal year, or 7 months, around February, March.
Right.
There's some worry today that it won't be, in part. Some people, when we talk about Congress, they about Christmas tree bills. I mean, you hang everything on the bill because you know it's going to pass. So you put totally extraneous stuff, and then someone says, I'm for the defense budget, but not this stuff. And so you get a stalemate. Used to be, oh, shut up, just pass it. No one will know what's in there anyway. And that's why you have these multi-thousand-page bills that no one has read, they don't know what's in it. But you got the defense budget and you hold your nose about the other stuff. The House has basically said, no, we're not going to play that game. And I understand, but on the other hand, the Senate leadership is playing a game of chicken, saying, oh, they'll cave. Well, if they don't cave, you go to last year's budget for the rest of the year. We've never done that with a defense bill, plus a 1% cut.
Oh, wow.
And the 1% cut was a disincentive saying, look, you don't want to have last year's budget and a 1% cut, so pass the darn budget. I don't know if that's enough leverage for Congress to get their act together. But this is not well explained, unfortunately, by the media. But it is, as they say, it is what it is. It is no way to run a railroad. It costs more money. It delays programs. That means they go up in price because of inflation. And the bad guys are watching. So when we don't do what that's the fundamental number one job of Congress, pass a budget. Well, they wait and wait and wait, and then, I worked in the Senate. I'm someone who has a great affection for the traditions of the Senate and so forth. And because of money and social media, anything you do is magnified. So whenever something happens on Capitol Hill, my inbox is filled with requests for money. Doesn't matter what side, because I give money to little pennies so I get their stuff. And it's basically, if you vote or say you're going to vote a certain way, you get buried with anti stuff and money raised against you. And so everybody wants to have a safe vote. So what they do is you have a train, and you put an engine going north, you hook it up. Engine going south, you hook it up. And then you tell both engineers, floor it. And so Congress loves to go in opposite directions simultaneously. And you get these bills that go in the opposite direction simultaneously, and you go, what is this? On the one hand, it goes there, and you can say, see? On the other hand, it goes that way, and you ignore that. It's a crazy way to run a railroad. And what the House has said, let's pass each bill individually. You want aid to Ukraine? Just have aid to Ukraine. You want aid to Israel? Just have aid to Israel. And vote on its merits. Well,
Heaven help us.
it's they're reforming the budget process in the House. They're putting together a commission. And this is what they want. Just vote up and down and suck it up, be a grown person, and if you get criticized, so what? That's politics. Okay? But if you believe something needs to be done, set it up, get it done, vote it up or down, and sign it into law, and get the train moving. I agree with them, but as someone who's spent a lot of time on Capitol Hill, it's easier to blackmail the other guy and say, well, we're not going to do anything until you give us what we want, even though it may not be good or may not be, who knows? I mean, we're spending hundreds of billions of dollars on electric vehicle stuff and green energy and all this. And if you look at the electric vehicles you saw in Chicago and Minnesota, and so they don't work in the winter.
And besides,
And you can't resell them. And the range goes way, way down in cold weather. And so you had people on the highways around Chicago and Minneapolis, cars wouldn't operate, and they were hitching rides with guys with internal combustion engines so they could get home, because they need to bring blankets and hand warmers and stuff and food in their cars because they can't move anywhere. We were literally spending hundreds of billions of dollars on stuff that is just, it's not the right priority, unfortunately.
Do either of the presidential candidates offer a way forward or upwards at this time?
Well, on the narrow sea launch cruise missile, Trump's yes, Biden is no. I don't know whether he did not veto the defense bill that he signed that calls for the development of the cruise missile. So I know they opposed it in the nuclear posture review, but since that time, a number of Democrats like Jack Reed, who's chairman of the House Senate Armed Services Committee from Rhode Island, is a Democrat, has come out in favor of it. The head of naval operations, the first woman to head it, she's come out in favor of it, as other military leaders. So there's hope, but it's going to take some time. There's no magic bullet here, unfortunately, because as I said, if you waste 10 years, actually we wasted 20 plus years from 1996, the first new platform goes in either air, water, or land. It's going to be the ICBMs, subs, or bombers, sometime around 2030, plus or minus a few months. That's 30 years, that's 34 years between deployments of new, and we've never done this before. I did a chart from 1955 to 2035. And I did a picture of a bomber, picture of an ICBM, submarine, cruise missile, and I plotted it on a graph of when did it become initially operating. I mean, the first program that I got in the field operated by our military. Mm-hmm. And between 1996 and 2031 is blank. It's white. And I showed that to General Hyten, who was the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And he looked at it and immediately said, that's General Harensack's holiday. Because General Harensack, who never retired, he's working in Nevada for a lot of the nuclear stuff there. It's a huge conglomerate. At one of my seminars, he used the phrase, we took a holiday from history. And what he meant was, we basically went to sleep. We pretended history doesn't operate anymore, the threats are gone. And he said that, I think 2002 or 3, when he was in the Air Force as a senior military officer. And he was right. But it's interesting, the Pentagon published that chart.
Oh dear.
Years ago, about 2014, 15, 16, something I can remember. And I didn't realize it until a friend of mine who does the annual, every 2 years they do a handbook on nuclear stuff. And Steve Henry was the guy who ran it, and he put it in And it was done by a graphic artist up in New York State in Buffalo, who was long distance, helped me do this. And she did a beautiful job. So we went to sleep, unfortunately, and we did it in the 30s. Roosevelt became president in 1933. Defense budget was $732 million. What was it at the time of Pearl Harbor? $732 million.
But we had industrial base.
Well, we had a huge industrial base, but the budget was flat. All during that period of the 1930s, when it wasn't as if the Japanese weren't on the march or Hitler on the march, but the budget went up, up and down by a couple tens of millions of dollars. And we paid for it. I mean, same thing as when we took Korea off the map. I said, it's outside our defense perimeter. Well, that was January. In June, what did the North Koreans do? They invaded. And what cost? 35,000 dead Americans, but 2 million dead Koreans. And as someone who lived and studied in Korea as a college student, that's their family. They have been one of our strongest allies. Whenever we've had a conflict, South Korean military have stepped up and come to our help, whether Iraq or whether Kosovo or wherever we've been in Vietnam, they've stepped up. And they're an extraordinary country in terms of their dedication to their own security. They really have ponied up. And we have an extraordinary alliance. What's remarkable is North Korea and China, because of their saber rattling, have pushed Japan and South Korea closer together, which is somewhat of a miracle, given the history of the two countries. Now they're becoming better allies of ours and better allies and friends themselves.
Peter, I want to thank you so much for all the wonderful information you gave us. I'm looking forward to your coming back to us in a very short time to continue telling us about what you've been talking about.
Thank you. I would enjoy that and hope that you can do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is Speak Up. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of the day. Goodbye.